Okay, good morning and welcome to my first online video. Um, and we're going to look at one of Mankiw's applications of elasticity. In our previous class, we worked out that the revenue associated with the market, that is how much money changes hands in equilibrium, is a function of how elastic the demand curve is. Well, to show you the picture for that, here's our very scrappy axes, and here's a demand curve. And as price changes, the revenue changes. Okay, so the revenue is the area between the price and quantity and the origin. So here's revenue, we'll call that revenue 1 at quantity 1 and price 1. But at a different quantity and price, let's see, how am I going to shade this? I want to go that way. Here's revenue 2 at quantity 2 and price 2. So depending on where we are on the demand curve, the revenue might change. And in particular, if price goes up and demand is relatively elastic, so we could think about elasticity greater than 1, then revenue typically goes down. In fact, revenue will go down, and that's because the adjustment in quantity, right, if price goes up, quantity will go down, quantity demanded will go down, and so the revenue is going to go up because price goes up, but it's going to go down a little bit more because quantity demanded has gone down by more than price has gone up in percentage terms. On the other hand, if price goes up and elasticity is less than 1, okay, so the demand curve is relatively inelastic, think about this as a vertical demand curve, then revenue will go up. And the way to think about this is price goes up, but because demand is relatively inelastic, the quantity doesn't change that much. So price changes, it goes up, quantity doesn't change that much, so price times quantity is going to increase. Okay, and so now we're going to be looking at this application from Mankiw about could good news for farming be bad news for farmers? And so this is going to be a situation where farmers have a new hybrid of wheat available, and it's going to increase their production per acre. So let's have a think about what this is going to mean, firstly for the supply curve. Okay, so again, I'm going to get better at drawing these axes as we go along. So here is a market for wheat. Okay, and then we have an initial supply curve, and then we have an improvement in the technology of production of wheat. Okay, so we can think about this as the marginal cost of producing wheat has gone down, or holding prices constant, suppliers are willing to produce and then sell more wheat. So here's our new supply curve. So we can think about this firstly as a shift to the right in supply curve. So holding price constant, sellers want to sell more wheat, or holding quantity constant, the marginal cost has gone down. Okay, so that's the situation on the supply side. But what's going to happen on the demand side is going to determine whether this is good for farmers in general or not. Okay, and to think about this, Remember that if this new wheat technology becomes available, then everyone is going to adopt it. So I mean, obviously, I would much rather, I would very much be happy to be the farmer who is the only person to get this new wheat technology, because you know, I can produce stuff at a lower cost, everyone else has higher costs, so that's good for me. But what happens if everyone is able to adopt this technology? Okay, so we're going to think about this in terms of whether demand is relatively elastic or inelastic. Okay, so let's have a think about this in terms of the two extreme cases for elasticity. Okay, so let's draw our initial conditions. So here's our quantity and price. Here's our supply curve. And we have a demand curve now that is, let's think about the inelastic case to start off with. So we essentially have a vertical demand curve. Okay, so this is the situation before the technology is implemented, and then suppliers get this better technology, and so the market supply curve is going to shift to the right. Let's have a think about what's happened. So because we have a perfectly inelastic demand curve, over here we have both our quantity 1, which is also equal to our quantity 2, right? Consumers don't care what the price is with this demand curve, they're just going to buy this much wheat. Okay. So now the price is completely pinned down by the supply side. Here is our initial price, P1, and here is our final price, P2. Okay, so price has gone down and quantity has remained the same. Okay, so this means that revenue has gone down. Okay, and so now producers are receiving less revenue for selling the same amount of stuff. Now their costs might be lower as well, so it's not clear whether costs have gone down by more or less than revenue have, but this is a situation which, at least potentially, if costs haven't gone down by that much, this could be a situation that is bad for farmers. Okay, so this is sort of the first extreme case, and by studying the two different extreme cases, we can learn about, you know, in reality something, the result will be somewhere in between, and we can understand what we can pin down in terms of what will happen and what might not happen. So this is inelastic demand. Okay, now let's look at the next case. I don't know why that is there. I'm going to delete that. Okay. So now we're going to look at elastic demand. In fact, perfectly elastic demand. Okay, so a perfectly elastic demand curve is going to be horizontal. And we have our initial supply curve, and after the increase in production, so the lowering of costs of wheat production, we have the supply curve that's shifted to the right. Now let's think about this now. So now the price of wheat is completely pinned down by the demand curve. It must be at the same height as the demand curve because the demand curve is flat. So now we've pinned down P1 equals P2. And now what's happened to quantity? Here's our initial quantity. And here is our final quantity. So in this situation, revenue must have gone up. Now to see this, here is our initial revenue, right? P1 times Q1, the area of this rectangle here. And then, sorry, that's included in here. But our final revenue also includes this rectangle here, which, in total revenue, revenue 2 is going to be this place here. So revenue has increased. So let's have a think about this. Costs per item have gone down, and revenue has gone up. This is a good situation for farmers. Okay, their revenue has gone up. But what I want you to remember here is that whether a new technology is going to be good for the supply side or not is going to depend on whether demand is relatively inelastic. Okay, so this one here being the extreme case of this, or whether demand is relatively elastic, and here we have the extreme case of this. Okay, so we could have a situation where all farmers adopt this technology and they're worse off because consumers aren't going to buy more. They're going to buy the same amount, and because we have a supply curve that is below the original one, suppliers are going to receive less revenue. Okay, or we could have a situation that's good for farmers because consumers just pay the same price no matter what the quantity, and now sellers are selling more stuff, right? They're selling more stuff at the same price, and their costs have gone down. Per item, their marginal costs have gone down. Remember, the second supply curve is below the first supply curve. So this should be a good situation for farmers. Okay, so hopefully this example has helped clarify something I would have pointed out in our in-person class. Remember, as we go ahead and we start talking about welfare and externalities and that kind of stuff, being able to interpret these areas on the graph are going to be increasingly important. Okay, so I hope you're having a good social distancing, and I will see you, or at least your avatar, sometime soon. Have a good one.